Let's talk some college ball. This was the greatest playoff weekend we've had in a very short amount of time. What are we talking, 9 years of this? So we deserve this because the semifinals have not been great historically. And that was an all-timer. Let's start with TCU's 51-45 win against Michigan. So Michigan has the ball, 4th and goal. They run the Philly special, and it doesn't work. All right? Now, I felt there was a bit of a playing of the results and reading back some of this stuff where it's like, well, if you're Michigan, you're trying to set the tone, right? You're trying to set the tone. But then on the other side, it's like, why are you doing that when you're the favorite? Like, that's for the underdog. Like we saw with Kansas State against Bama. Kansas State just even though they were up 10-0 on Alabama and ended up getting trucked later on, they were treating it like a non-Power 5 team, going up against the big boys and being like, we got to do everything. And I don't mean that as disrespectful to Kansas State or anything, but they called a game going, we got to keep converting these fourth down. We got to go for touchdowns. Granted, they kicked the field goal a little bit later, but you get the point. Like, they had a play where they're like, we got to keep pace with this. Honestly, I just think Harbaugh's down there. He wanted the 7 points. I don't think it's that complicated. The problem was for Michigan in their first 3 red zone trips, they had 3 total points. They got screwed on the Roman Wilson touchdown. That was a touchdown, and then they overturn it. I just don't think he had possession of the football in front of the goal line. I don't know if that would have changed much. Going into the playoff, when you rank the quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy was always going to be 4th out of this group. And going into the Ohio State game, that was always the concern, that you knew you were at a disadvantage when it was J.J. going up against C.J. Stroud. And we'll get to Stroud's great night here in a moment here. Some of the overall numbers, I guess you could talk yourself into McCarthy being good enough. They scored 45 points, right? We had some turnovers lead to this stuff as well. It was kind of a turnover-filled game. I mean, this game was out of control there. In the third quarter, we're talking there was a stretch, I think, of 7 minutes where it was just touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. I mean, it was one of the most entertaining games that I've seen. But McCarthy was 1-9 to start the game on third down. So I would tell you what I watched and what I saw was a quarterback that I wasn't always all the way in on all season long. There were numbers that would back that up. There were games that would back it up. We were like, if this guy needs to win you a game, can it happen? And he had his all-timer against Ohio State. So credit to him. But in this game, even though it's 350 yards total there, it just didn't feel like it was something I could trust. And the third down numbers, I think, tell you that. I think the biggest story of this really was the line of scrimmage stuff. And that's why Sonny Dykes was so pissed off. Nobody's more mad than everybody, after they win a game. And they're like, oh, we heard all this stuff, right? And immediately on the field, he's doing the post game. And he's like, yeah, we heard the Big Ten was just going to push us around the whole time. Well, it really was the other way around. TCU had 13 tackles for loss in this one. That's crazy. Right? After Edwards busted that first big play, Michigan averaged 3.5 yards per carry. So they weren't pushing around a TCU defense that statistically was the biggest question mark probably of any of the profiles for the playoff teams. TCU, on the other hand, ran it 41 times for 263 yards, and that's after Miller was out and DeMarcado got going as well. So you're looking at some of the line of scrimmage stuff throughout that game going, man, TCU kind of kicked their ass. They're up big. And then it looks like it's a shootout all over again. I feel like the right team won in this, though. When you watch 4 hours of this game, it felt like the right team won over the course of how this game ended. And that part of it, I don't know that it's really all that debatable. So congrats to TCU, one of the most unlikely national championship participants we've ever seen. 201 odds to even get here. And they're playing for a title against Georgia. What does it mean for Michigan? I guess, when I talked to Friday about all the pressure with them, I don't know that it was pressure that got to them. You could talk about the layoffs, and it really becomes that whole order of if this happens, then we go backwards and say, did it have anything to do with this? And, I just think TCU beat them, man. I think it was a crazy, wild, entertaining game. And Duggan wasn't great. But they ran it at this Michigan defense that was number 5 against the run, ran it at them all day, which is probably the least expected outcome of all the different units going up against each other. I guess the other part of it for Michigan is that at least Ohio State didn't win. So let's take a look at Georgia's 42-41 win against Ohio State. I actually think I like this game even better. And when I talked in the first game about it felt like TCU winning was the right outcome, I don't know if Georgia winning this one was the right outcome. Ohio State comes out and no one can handle Marvin Harrison Jr. And he gets knocked out on a play that was kind of weird where it was sort of targeting but not targeting. And I understand why it wasn't at the time. I also don't understand why the defensive back went to lay out Harrison Jr. and didn't just make a play on the ball to even put himself in a situation where it would have been a massive penalty at that time. But if there was one concern about Georgia's defense that we all fall in love with and all the stats stuff, I think from a personnel standpoint, other than Ringo, you were just always a little worried about, like, do they have enough guys back there to match up? Now, you could also make the point that Georgia didn't face any quarterback wide receiver combination like Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, it's filthy what this kid can do. Yes, I think Tennessee's a really good passing offense, and Hooker with all those different receivers, phrasing, that's not easy. And Georgia just shut that down. Don't fall victim to looking at what the final score was against Tennessee. So it's not like Georgia hasn't faced any good passing offenses this year, but there's nothing like Stroud and Harrison Jr. And if Harrison Jr. stays healthy, much like I've talked about the Jameson Williams injury going back to the title game, if you look at it, you're like, man, that changed a lot for Bama. Ohio State probably doesn't lose this game. Now, I know they made some adjustments and Ringo was going to follow Harrison Jr., but that guy was putting on an absolute clinic there. So if you're a Buckeyes fan, that one stings. You lose Stover, the tight end. We already know you're out with Henderson, and Jigba Smith is out too. I normally don't have a ton of sympathy when Ohio State's losing skill guys because it seems like they have as many as anybody in the country, but I don't have sympathy when we're talking about Big Ten regular season games because every time they line it up, they're more talented than every other team the entire season for multiple seasons in a row. They're never at a talent deficit, but I was a little surprised that people were so dismissive of Ohio State, even with the injuries, and this is where the injuries come in because now you're going up against Georgia, but Ohio State's one of the 4 teams in college football that should never have some concern about a gap in talent. And that's how this one was playing out. But then Georgia, to their credit, which is unlike any other team, this just doesn't happen much. When Georgia's in trouble, they go back to the run. I love McIntosh. I think I like him even a little bit more than Edwards. But I don't know how many other programs go, all right, we're in trouble. Let's run the football. Air Force, maybe. And so as the first half is closing out, I'm going, all right, Georgia's going to win this game. They're starting to control things here a little bit. I think the line of scrimmage battle throughout this game was a bit up and down where, Ohio State's O-line held up pretty well. At certain times, it looked like their D-line was getting blasted off the football, but certainly not as bad as LSU was in the SEC title game. So it feels like, at least based on most of our expectations, hey, Georgia's going to win. Things are heading in that direction, and then Stroud goes to the touchdown and close out the first half. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. We still have a ball game here. The other part of this storyline, too, is that Stetson Bennett, who has been nails for this Georgia team over these last couple of years, looked rattled. It looked like his confidence was shook a bit. He made a weird second down throw at the end of the first half, and it looked like Georgia was going to try to figure out if they get some points quick before the half was over. And then they just decided on third down, forget it. And then even Kirby Smart during his like mid-game interview there with a sideline reporter was just like, hey, what was going on in that series? He's like, well, we got to tell him to calm down. Like, he was acknowledging we got to let him calm down a little bit. And then it didn't really happen. So you're thinking, wow, this game might be on Stetson Bennett for him. A defensive player for Ohio State falls down. Georgia's track stud catches a wide open touchdown. Then Stetson, when he has to put together the great drive, he does it. It felt like there was a little bit too much time left. That was certainly the case. CJ Stroud, who made plays in and out of whatever it was they were trying to do all night long. He looked terrific. He had big runs, which he doesn't normally do. I don't understand the quarterback spy stuff and what the rules should be, but it looked like Georgia had no interest in it. And you could say, well, that wasn't on the scouting report. Well, maybe in this spot, man coverage, when it's man underneath and then it's 2 deep safeties basically playing prevent on that big run that got him into field goal position, you're thinking you couldn't keep one guy up there, especially when you're playing that deep in coverage. And there was really nothing underneath except for man, because there was one outlet receiver that a linebacker went out to the right and ran with. And then Stroud saw it, was like, they're going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep running it. So you could say it wasn't on the scouting report, but through the course of the game, especially in that moment, you would have thought maybe somebody stays with Stroud just to maybe prevent him from even doing it and making him throw something a little bit deep, because you're playing at that point to defend against the field goal. They line it up, and it's not even close from the jump right as the ball drops. Couple things here. I know Washington, the big tight end, was gone too. It felt like we got a ton of Stover updates and not much on big number 0 there for Georgia. I want to talk about something that feels a little unrelated to last night's or to Saturday night's game. The Bowers play, who was really quiet throughout much of this game, one of the toughest matchups in college football. And I don't know if it was Washington being out that kind of tilted the field towards him from their coverage, but Bowers isn't a traditional tight end at all. So great job for Ohio State. Two things. Let me do the smaller one here first. Everyone needs to stop when it turns into a shootout with teams that have good statistical defenses from saying, oh, I thought these teams played defense. And everybody does it all the time. And it's just a way to shit on a team that you don't like or a conference you don't like. Oh, I thought these teams played defense. This is what the game is now. Okay? There are really good defenses that get lit up. Like, I remember joking years ago with Van Pelt when we had the radio show, and I'm like, honestly, I think for a lot of teams, it's like, let's keep these guys under 30. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what it is. So when you have these 50-point games, like, again, Bama, Tennessee is a classic example, is that if you hated the SEC after that game, being one of the 5 best games of the season, it was fucking awesome to see Knoxville on fire that night. You go, oh, I thought they played D. And yeah, I'm talking about, well, we talked about Joel Klatt, and we're not going to do that because his friend's telling me all the time, which I actually think is hilarious. So I'm not getting mad at them. This is just what the game is. You're going to have big free-for-all scores, and especially with the time off, I think the defenses are even a bigger disadvantage because, I think it's different for every single team, who's in shape, who isn't, who takes the conditioning stuff seriously, who takes the opponent seriously. You think everybody in all of these matchups would have taken the opponent seriously. Maybe you think that's why Michigan lost, and they didn't with TCU. But it's just going to happen. It's going to happen where teams will still finish in the top 10 in a lot of defensive categories, and there'll be a night where they get lit up. So we need to all collectively stop doing hey, I thought these teams played defense, because this is what the sport is. It can turn into a free-for-all with any matchup. A bigger thing that all of us should notice and be ready for. Every time rights fees go up, it means a lot of things, but the most significant that you should care about is the actual broadcast and how often networks have to justify the rights fees by squeezing every single millimeter out of ad space. When Bowers is out of bounds before the first down marker on 4th down, he's ruled down. It's a massive play. And yet when we saw the replay, I'm like, wait, I don't think he was out of bounds and got the ball past the marker. So what's going on? And we go to commercial. It's not specific to ESPN. It is every single network that is doing this now. We run through 6 fucking commercials. I'm reading about Match.com. Solo on a New Year's Eve. I don't need this right now. And I need to know if Bowers is a first down, because I think it was a first down. They ran 6 ads, came back. Fowler's mid-sentence. It's not on Fowler and Herbstreit, okay? Mid-sentence, and it's like, oh, while you were gone, we're about to snap the football on first down because of this. It's happening way too often. And the networks know they're going to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and getting away with it. The regional sports networks for League Pass, there are plays going on, and they're running a 2-box with an ad. And if the missed free throw and then something happens, we're still in a 2-box. Nesson was the king of this. Their Red Sox broadcast, because they're trying to squeeze every fucking dollar, because they have to, because they're a mid-market team now, we realize, in Boston. Can't pay for the best players. Have to hope a injured starter will sign for 1 year and $10 million. The Red Sox would have, they'd be in the field, 2nd and 3rd, 2 outs. It could be the top of the 9th. They're at home. Somebody hits a shot into the triangle. Jackie Bradley Jr. turns around, diving catch, Willie Mays style. And we're hearing about fucking W.B. Mason before we even see a replay. So it's happening everywhere because the rights fees keep going up, and the networks have cool, the rights fees went up again. Okay, well, I have an hour on this. I'm not going to do it today, but it's happening way too often now in these broadcasts for every single network, regional and nationally, to go, I need to keep finding ways to shave the actual game content and have more ad content that's relevant. I don't care about the patches on the jerseys. Keeping it local again. When we thought, well, they're going to put signs up on the monster, nobody gives a shit. You don't even notice them anymore, right? But I'm noticing in a college football playoff game when it appears that Bowers has the first down, where if he doesn't, it's a turnover on downs, and I'm being told I need to find my online life partner within hours. I have different priorities, clearly, but that was disappointing. Last point on college football. The expansionists, the people that want 12 teams. You think you won the argument this weekend. Does that mean I've won the argument? Every other year, the playoff games have stunk? Do you know how flawed that argument is? And again, to review, much like the play-in game, I'm not anti-play-in game because I think they're going to be bad games. I'm not anti-playoff expansion because I think they're going to be bad games. I'm not an expansionist because now we're going to have really average teams that didn't do shit all season playing for a chance for a national championship. That's wrong. The same way a play-in team in the NBA who could be the 10 seed and could have a below 500 record, and in a weird year in a 7 seed could have like a really good record, like 50 wins, could be way ahead of them in the actual games behind standings. And then it's like, even though it's weighted for you with the 1 game versus the 2 and the home and the road, let's just run it back and try it again. And again, we all know why we're getting this, why the tournament's going to expand, why the NFL added an extra week and an extra playoff spot, why baseball a couple years ago just said, throw them all in the playoffs. The easiest way for these owners that should be more stewards of the game get to expand their businesses is by creating more sellable items, right? It's very simple. You guys already understand all this stuff. But we're getting to a weird point here where we're going to start diluting shit. And then we're going to look up at a couple years going, wait, was this the best plan? It was financially. I get that. But it doesn't necessarily always mean a better product.